we're excited to have Chris talk to us more about the Great Backyard Bird Count tonight. Thanks for being here, Chris.
All right, thank you very much. It sounds like bird is the word for the month, so I like to hear that. So, yeah, thank you for the introduction. If you don't know me, my name is Chris Kubiak. I'm the Director of Education at the Audubon Society of Western Pennsylvania. I do a whole host of things, obviously focused on birds, but not only birds. I do everything from climate change to native plants to a whole host of stuff. And I teach what is called our Master Birder program. It is a 12-week program that will teach you how to identify the vast majority of birds in Western PA. Think of master gardeners, but for birds. But I am not a ornithologist by academic training. I always joke about this. I've been with Audubon now 12 years, but I'm a historian by academic training that pretends to be an ornithologist. I've been birding 30 plus years. I got into birds when I was a kid growing up in the North Hills of Pittsburgh. Really love birds to this day. Never thought I'd be doing this as a career, but here I am. So I'm going to talk tonight about some of our backyard birds that you're going to find there in Peters Township, Washington County, other parts of Western Pennsylvania, wherever you're coming from there. But really get into what is a very important, what we call a community science program that will be coming up here mid-month, and that is the Great Backyard Bird Count. Some of you may just be getting into birding for the first time, or maybe you just passively observe birds and you say, well, why am I, or how could I get out there and actually observe birds? Believe it or not, it is much easier than you may think. And in fact, really, there's only a few resident species that I'd be willing to bet that you're really going to have to learn very well, because by far they're going to be the most common ones that you're going to encounter this time of year. So we'll talk a little bit about that. The backyard bird count, and I'm going to share my screen right now, bring up my first PowerPoint that I have here for you. Let's go to the very beginning. Okay, look at this. Going there. All right. So this particular, talking about the Great Backyard Bird Count, I'll be honest with you, I do a large number of what we call community science programs through Audubon. And I'll just briefly talk about a few of them. Next slide here. I am also, if you've ever heard of the Christmas Bird Count, I am one of the leaders for what's known as the South Butler Christmas Bird Count. And it is actually substantially harder to do a Christmas bird count than it is the Great Backyard Bird Count, for a number of reasons. One, there's a lot more restrictions geographically, time-wise, based on it. It's a very robust count. This particular one that's coming up here in February, this is in a lot of ways the exact opposite. And they designed that at Cornell by design. They want everybody to be able to participate in this, because essentially when we're talking about community or what used to be known as citizen science, think of it as crowd sharing for science. We need you all to participate because we want to have a snapshot of what different bird populations are doing throughout the year, right? Obviously, scientists can't be everywhere and ornithologists can't be everywhere at once. So this is where we need you to come in, right? All right, we will go to the next slide. This is my obligatory, just brief introduction to ASWP. I'll be real brief here. We're focused, Washington County is a big part of our service area, but 7 counties of Western PA. We connect people to birds and nature through our programs, projects, and places, and a program like this, right? So let's talk about the Great Backyard Bird Count in a little bit more detail and talk about some of these other things, right? So some of these other community science programs that we all administer or we train people to do is really important, right? And it's really important because you all, every person listening, whether you're in person there at the library or you're at home over Zoom, each one of you can be a scientist, right? You can impress your friends, families, coworkers, whoever, and say, oh, I was a scientist this weekend because I participated in the Great Backyard Bird Count. Most people may be looking at you a little wondering, what is that? But I'd be willing to bet a lot of folks, when I tell them that, are kind of impressed. But it's important because you're the ones that are going to get this data that we will help understand what's going on with our always fluctuating bird populations and hopefully help us ahead of time to figure out how to conserve a lot of species that are in decline. There's been a lot of worrisome studies coming out here the last couple of years. One of the biggest ones that really has us thinking is since 1970, if you aggregated every single individual bird and all the species in North America, we've lost roughly since 1970 about 2.9 billion individual birds. So we've gone from about 10 billion individual birds now down to around 7 billion, maybe even a little less than that. We're seeing really substantial declines in species that not that long ago were pretty common. You see their chimney swifts, though right now we're down in the Amazon. That's not going to be in this count, but there's a lot of other species that we're really looking and monitoring. Same things with like fireflies, or I grew up in Western PA. I still call them lightning bugs, right? Maybe you do too. Monarch butterflies is another one, or Project Budburst that looks at the timing of when plants flower and leaf out. But it's really birds, and this is why we stress birds so much, is because if you're familiar with this term, birds are that true canary in the coal mine of what's going on in our environment and ecosystems. So my family grew up, they were steel workers down in the south side of Pittsburgh. Some of them worked in coal mines at one point of time. So you may be familiar, before modern technology, they would bring canaries in there and they would warn the miners that there was some pocket of gas that they couldn't smell, and that bird was an early warning sign. Well, birds are still doing that today, and they are telling us truly right now there are some really concerning things to be worried about when we're seeing these rapid declines of what were once not that long ago common species. I'll give you a prime example. I don't know how many of you know what our state bird is, but if you don't, it is the ruffed grouse. And I grew up in Franklin Park and Wexford, and even into the mid to late 90s, I would still see the ruffed grouse around that area despite development pressures, which I know you also have down there in Peters Township. Ruffed grouse were still pretty common. I have not seen a ruffed grouse in Allegheny County now for at least probably 10 years. In Butler County, when I live very close to Moraine State Park, I have not seen one now in over 5 years. They've declined 89% in the last 23 years in Pennsylvania. That is a huge crash. We have an idea of the main reason, but it is helping us now at least find some ways to conserve this species. So this is truly, this bird count that's coming up here is where you can help by participating and counting those birds in your backyard. It may not help the ruffed grouse right away, but it will help other species that we are trying to get an understanding about their rapidly shifting populations. So the Great Backyard Bird Count was created in 1998. It's supposed to be what we consider a midwinter or later winter survey of mostly backyard and resident species. So your cardinals, your robins, blue jays, crows, all of that stuff. And it's global, right? So if you really ever want to see what different folks around planet Earth are finding and really want to see, hey, you know, I'm looking at this map here. What did they find in the Great Backyard Bird Count in Madagascar, of all places, right? You can go on to eBird, and we'll talk briefly about here, and actually search for that kind of stuff. But closer to home here, right? This is where our conservation scientists are going to be looking at your data and your observations, and then starting to kind of put this very complicated puzzle together. But it is not just something in the United States. It is a global community science program. Okay, here's what's so great about it. You can count birds wherever you like. So unlike the Christmas bird count, where we have really specific defined geographic, what we call circles that are roughly 15 miles in diameter, this can be anywhere you want. It can be in your own backyard. You could go down to a local park that you like to maybe hike or walk or bird or just enjoy nature. It could be other nature centers there. It could even be there at the library there in Peters Township. It can be anywhere you want. We just want you to go out there and count and observe the birds and put that observation into the computer so we can sort of analyze that data. All right. All right, so that is a much more positive thing, I think, than the challenges that Christmas bird count represents to a lot of people that say, "Well, I don't want to go up to Pittsburgh or down other places in Washington County. I want to do my backyard." Well, this count is for you. As I've already mentioned and sort of prefaced a lot of these things, is we know scientists cannot be everywhere at once. So they call this in a lot of ways sort of your data blindness, because while, yeah, there's a lot of them maybe up near Cornell or where there's universities like, State College with Penn State or the University of Pittsburgh or other universities, we're still missing landscape-wide observations. Peters Township, right? We need to know what's going on with the birds in your neck of the woods and try to get some understanding to see what species are going on. And this is where these long-term records of what birds are being observed and what birds are not being observed is really important, right? So we want to make sure that your birds are being counted, the birds that you're seeing around where you live, and that's really important, okay? So when is it, right? Well, it is a 4-day period coming up here mid-month, right? So it starts on Friday, February 16th. It runs that Saturday, Sunday, and Monday to the end of February 19th. And again, you can count anywhere you want. If you want someone like us at the Audubon Society of Western Pennsylvania to lead you on a walk where we actually go out there and count the birds on one of our reserves, we have 3 different counts. Closest one to you all was at our Beechwood Farms Nature Reserve there in Fox Chapel. We're leading that walk there again on Saturday, February 17th from 10 to noon. If you want to get really ambitious and drive up to our other sites in Butler County, you can see the 2 other ones, Suckup Nature Park and Buffalo Creek Nature Park. But these are things that we will have an educator there to help guide you through it. But I'll be honest with you, you really don't need that. It is truly one that if you already have feeders or you're able to identify some relatively common backyard birds, and we'll go over some of them here, you could do this in your own backyard. Okay. All right. This is my quick pitch because there's actually 3 ways in which you can put your data into the Great Backyard Bird Count. Now, I'm 47 years old. Sometimes Zoom scares me when I do these programs because, you never know with computers and technology, right? Maybe some of you are tech whizzes and you've got your phones and everything. But I'll be honest with you, I don't know if it's because I'm a historian or what, but I tell younger people these days, I go, you know what I used to do with my bird records? I would take this thing called a notebook with paper and I'd open it up. And with that paper, I would take a pen and write it down. And I know that seems like a joke, but people think that's bizarre in some ways. I still do that. That's still how I record things. If you want to do that, you just write it down on a piece of paper. Then you can easily go to the website. You just Google the Great Backyard Bird Counts. We'll talk about some specifics here on how to do that, and you can put it in that way. But truly, the easiest way to do this is eBird, and even I use eBird, right? So eBird is an app that Cornell designed that essentially is for you to be able to record your observations right on your phone in your hand. It is incredibly easy to use, and it is the preferred way to put in your observations. One, you don't have to worry about putting in the location, how long you birded, how far you went. It automatically records all of that. If you are not putting into eBird, and we'll talk about the Merlin app next, you got to write all that stuff down and keep track of it where the computer's thinking for you. So if you're not on eBird and you want to learn more about it, I highly recommend going to eBird Essentials and reading it. But I'm serious, if I can do it, my parents can do it. They're in their mid-70s. Anybody can do it. All right, so there's a beautiful cedar waxwing there. We're seeing some interesting observations of them this year. They are not as abundant as they are in years past. And so some people are going, wow, is that a really bad thing? Or are these birds declining? And the answer is no. It's actually these birds are growing in their population, but they wander widely winter to winter based on their preferred food sources, right? So I have noticed this winter in both my Christmas bird count and other surveys and observations I do that they're not around. They're seemingly now further west of us for whatever reason, for their preferred food sources. But last year, roughly, the Great Backyard Bird Count observed over 6,700 different individual species of birds, which is fantastic, right? So that goes to roughly about, and again, we rounded up here, about 205,000 individual birds observed and about 225,000 individual people took part across the globe observing birds during the Great Backyard Bird Count. It has been a huge boon to scientists, and a lot of that data that you will be observing is being used in real scientific analysis and papers. But that's where we turn to you to be able to do this kind of stuff. Plus, let me go back one slide. If you get one of these birds in your yard, right, even if you don't care about the science side of it, that's a great bird to look at. I mean, look how gorgeous cedar waxwings are, right? Just a really cool looking bird. So it's a great program we do sometimes with students at schools, scouts, families, enthusiasts of nature. Individuals do it as well. And right, it's science, of course, but it is also very user friendly compared to a lot of other community science programs. So I've already talked, but I'll talk some more specifics here about what we have learned from this, right? As I mentioned with the cedar waxwings, there's year-to-year changes that if we get a larger picture, we don't freak out that we're not seeing cedar waxwings here this year. We just will see them in other places. And these reports have already shown that before this year's Great Backyard Bird Count. Okay. We also see what we call interannual migration patterns. Sometimes, especially where you are there in Washington County, you'll get certain species like a red-winged blackbirds kind of hanging around all winter. Some winters we don't. This has been a very disjointed winter, if you've noticed, right? I mean, up here in Butler, we got our first snow on November 1st. We got 2 inches. And then it was relatively average in November. We had a very warm December, and then we had that really sharp cold spell in January that has really impacted a lot of these different bird species, particularly ones that need open water, right? So these are really important observations for us to observe and to put in there so scientists can kind of get an idea of some of these different migration patterns or year-to-year changes. But most importantly, it's these long-term trends. And I will tell you, I officially, when I look at my birding career, I started in 1987 with my mom counting birds at our feeders in our backyard. And I've been birding, you know, I took some time off when I was a teenager in my early 20s, right? As a teenager, I had different interests there for a while, and then I kind of came back to birds. But I will tell you, even in my short lifespan, 47 years old, I have observed amazing and very, very radical changes in trends of different bird species. Some birds like ruffed grouse were common as could be and now are completely gone. Some birds that you would never, ever expect to see in Pennsylvania, like the bald eagle or the osprey or peregrine falcons, are now seemingly everywhere, right? So we're learning a lot. Not all of it's bad. Some of it's very good, right? I mean, I don't know how old all of you are, but when I was born in 1976, our bicentennial, we had a grand total of 2 bald eagles in the entire state of Pennsylvania. Now we have well over 8,000, and we stopped counting because there's so many of them. That's a great success story, and that shows some of these different trends that we want to learn more about. But some species, believe it or not, like whether it's red-winged blackbirds or some species like pileated woodpeckers or bluebirds, we want to kind of see some various trends because some are good, some are bad, and we're trying to track that as well, right? What's cool is sometimes you are able to see what's called eruptive patterns. We're due to an eruptive year for snowy owls to start moving down into our area. So while that's not happening this year, we're due for one. It's been about 10 years. Or what you see there, like red crossbills or white-winged crossbills or pine siskin, species that erupt into big numbers in certain years because of food resources up in the Arctic. So these are very telling as well. This is a really cool one. This is some of the ones going back to 1998. So you see, these are the 10, except for one species, which I'll talk about here in a minute, that I think really probably, if you don't know birds very well, you maybe have heard of most of these birds, if not all of them, right? And the American crow last year actually moved up to number 4 because in the late 90s, early 2000s, they were down at around 10 and dropped off the list. And that is because a introduced virus called West Nile virus that came in with a non-native mosquito was really hitting species in what's called the Corvidae or corvid family. So that's crows and blue jays and ravens. And crows and blue jays rapidly dropped, but they very quickly recovered and now have made their way back up. And thankfully, we thought maybe those birds would be in some ways wiped out. They seem like they've been able to adapt to the virus very quickly. But the ruffed grouse is not. And another one called the northern goshawk is also being hit by it. So these are really important observations to have. You might say, oh my God, I see cardinals all the time, or mourning doves, or crows, or blue jays. Good, that's what we want. We want you to continue seeing a lot of those birds. And by you observing them in your backyards or parks or wherever around you this year, you're helping us get a better understanding of what's going on. I mentioned every single bird on here except one. If you all live in Peters Township or Southern Allegheny County or in Washington County, you will have in your backyard. The only one that you will not have is the black-capped chickadee. You may see old field guides that says it was there. It was at one time, but this is another species that we are seeing rapidly change within our state, particularly Western PA. As our winters have warmed substantially since the late 70s, Carolina chickadees have pushed blackcaps out of a good portion of our area, and they hybridize, they interbreed in a certain spot as well. So down where you are in Peters Township, there are no blackcaps. They are now all either Carolina chickadees. You may have some hybrids. So if you do see a chickadee, I would just put Carolinas just to be safe. I live in Butler. We still have blackcaps, but I'm guessing from what I'm seeing now with these trends that in about 5 years, we'll have all hybrids. So climate change is definitely having a very, very strong impact on a different species here. All right. So I don't want to say, yay, we're number 4 because we want to be number 1, right? But we're doing pretty good in the top 10 states by checklist. So I hope you'll, not that I'm competitive or anything, but I always want to beat New York and Texas and California, you know, whether it's sports or birding, right? So and getting 145 species, that's pretty good. That's actually pretty exceptional given the time of year that we would find here in Western PA. All right, so what do you do? Again, it's very simple. Any one of those days from February 16th to the 19th, anywhere you want, backyard park, you can count, okay? It can be just one of those days, or if you want to be ambitious, it can be all those days. You don't have to count all days, all day long, right? You can do as little as one day for a minimum of 15 minutes, or we hope you're going to like it and want to observe more and longer, right? Because that gives us better data. But if you really just want to do one time for 15 minutes, one of those days, we'd hope you at least would want to do that, right? So, and again, so the what part of it is, well, what kind of bird and how many of each are you going to count? And we'll talk about that, right? Because I get this question all the time, whether it's feeder counts or the Christmas bird count. Hey, I see, and we'll look at that picture there with all the goldfinches, right? I'm watching my feeders for the Great Backyard Bird Count, and there's goldfinches coming and going. How do I know that they're not a different bird, right? And the answer is you don't. So let's say you're counting for 15 minutes and you see that feeder at one time, the most goldfinches you see, and we'll count here, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's one in the back there. You can kind of see its tail and wings. If you only see in that 15 minutes or half hour, 7 goldfinches, the most at one time, that's what you're going to mark in how many you saw. Is it possible you saw different individuals come through? Yes, but we always want to be conservative on the lower side rather than guessing on the higher end, right? So remember, if you're out in your yard, you're not even watching feeders, and you see in your 15 minutes or however long, 2 robins at any given time, that's what you're going to count. Okay. All right. So I don't know how many of you have this particular app. This is one of the newer ones. You can also, this is the 3rd way to count on the backyard bird count, right? It's called Merlin. And I think Merlin is a good tool, resource to use because it helps people, particularly beginning birders, kind of go through what experienced birders do, right? So Merlin will help you, again, ID about 2,000 species. Most of the common ones, it's very easy, right? So it'll ask you some of these questions. So let's say you can't identify a bird that you see. Well, you could say, wow, roughly my mind, okay, it was smaller than a Canada goose and crow and robin. And then what were the main colors? You can select 1 to 3. It'll start to narrow down the ID for you, right? Or if you took a photo with your phone, you can upload it to it and it'll do that. But the new big thing that a lot of people use is you can actually use the speakers on your phone to record bird calls or songs, and it will identify that for you too, and that will count. It is not always right. It's AI and all that is getting kind of scary good, but it still was not good enough to be able to figure out mockingbirds and other birds that mimic things. But luckily for us, we're not really going to get that in February. So that's not really something that you need to worry about, right? So you can use Merlin, same way. It'll record where you're at, how long, all that good stuff. Super easy. Even if you're not using it for the Great Backyard Bird Count, I highly recommend it because it's great at learning bird songs and bird calls, which are 2 distinctive things that birds do, right? So if you want to do more than 1 day or 1 site, you just create a new checklist, eBird, or you do it on Merlin, or you write it down, right, and how long and how far you walked. But I'd like to let the computer think for me with that stuff. You create a new checklist for each new location that you would do, again, through either eBird or Merlin or writing it down. And then if you're doing it a different day at the same place, like your backyard, just write the date and the new time, or just use eBird or Merlin to do that for you. If you see an indigo bunting, like you see that male indigo bunting there, they should all be down in like Mexico and the Caribbean right now. Let me know ASAP, because that would be a pretty big record there. But I just threw that in there because that's a nice splash of color this time of year. But I can almost guarantee you, you're not going to get that bird there, right? So entering counts, right? So eBird is super, super simple, right? All as you do in eBird, once you get your account and everything, is essentially to get on there. And really, once you sign up, it's like anything, like an email, right? You just hit start a new checklist and you put in the different birds that you see. Just put in robin, it'll come up, populate American robin. How many did you see? Just type it in there and then you hit submit. It is truly that easy. I mean, it is a super, super simple way to do it. If you want to do it the old school way, you've got a desktop. You just go to birdcount.org, or the easiest thing really, truly, is just to Google the Great Backyard Bird Count. You go on to their website, you hit submit observations. Unlike using eBird and Merlin, you got to then type it in and how long and where, find the address and all that other stuff. But again, if you don't want to use your phone in those apps, that is how you would do it. And you would submit those observations there, right? So newbies, if you've never done it, create an eBird account, right? If you're new at that, it's really that simple. I use my email for it. But if you already have eBird, or you do Feeder Watch or Nest Watch, you can reuse your username and password, right? So it gives you that option as well. All right, so where did you bird, right? So this is on the desktop version, because eBird and Merlin will automatically do all of this stuff for you, right? But you will you'll find on the map the address, you hit continue, right? Let's say you came with us on the 17th, and then you wanted to come the next day when we weren't doing, because one of us will be doing the count. We'll just have our participants there helping us, right? I would just type in Beechwood Farms, and it would populate it there and bring up the map. And then I hit continue, right? I pick the date, right? We're not going back in time to 2018, thankfully, right? And then you do all this other things, traveling, were you walking around? Were you just stationary? Did you want to pull out some old historical data, which actually we're doing at Audubon right now. We've got bird records going back to the 1920s that we're putting into eBird right now. Incidental, you were just driving and you saw a dodo flying past you. Well, hey, you can note that, right? Super easy. Again, this is all just if you're doing this on your laptop or desktop, right? Start time, how long you did it, the distance estimated, party size, how many people were birding with you, and any comments. And this is why, again, just because I want to be efficient, I use eBird for this because it does all of that for you already. Okay. The only thing you're going to have to put in is how many people are in your party. So if it's just you, that's simple. If it's you and a spouse or a, kid or grandchild, you can put those in there too. And then again, it goes through the list of the different species there. You can just jump in the search area for it and how many you saw. So you're out there at Peters Township Library on the 16th of February. And right outside there from the library, you count a flock of 75 Canada geese just hanging out there on the grass, or at your golf course that you guys had down there when I was there last time. You would just put 75. And let's say that's the only one you saw. Well, no, wait, we saw 2 wood duck. I saw 2 wood duck down on the pond there. So you put that in, and then all you do is hit submit. Okay. It's really, really simple. Okay. If you have a challenge, if something's not working, you just hit help and you'll be able to sort of say, oh, I want to put in this bird, or I want to find this bird, right? Some people you'll see there just, they couldn't identify the species. So you have the option to just put, again, you can put it in comments, but there's different types of hawks. Buteo is a soaring hawk, or a Sipiter is like a Cooper's hawk, right? But most of the time it's pretty straightforward with the different species. Sometimes though, it will prompt you, let's say that you saw what you think was 18 peregrine falcons. It will give you this arrow and say, please fix the items below, right? Because just knowing how that species acts, you're not going to get 18 peregrines together. That's just not what they do, right? Now, it's going to prompt you some things. You can write details of what you saw and hit complete. They will review it and they will probably reach back out to you. Don't worry about that. I know that's a lot of people are like, oh, I feel goofy doing that, whatever. I cannot tell you. I'm going to show you a bird that showed up, and believe it or not, right before the Great Backyard Bird Count near my offices in Fox Chapel. And when we put into eBird, it did the same exact thing, but this time we had pictures. But it was only the second record we ever had of this particular species in Western PA during the winter. So weird things happen, right? This is just for them to be able to flag it within the system so they can try to get more information. Again, where you're at here, let's say you're watching your feeder. You're not sure if it's a Carolina or a black cap or a hybrid. So I would recommend where you're at today, probably either defaulting to Carolina chickadee or this Carolina / black cap chickadee. I know that because of all the other birding I've done. Don't put black capped, right? And you see it one time at your feeder or in your yard, there's 5 tufted titmice hanging around together. Well, that's what we're putting in there. Same thing with the white-breasted nuthatch. It says, are you submitting the checklist of the birds that you were able to identify? Hit yes, submit. That's it. It's really that simple, right? You can go back and review and edit. You can email yourself a copy, share with others who compiled the list, submit another list. I really stretched this out just, again, to make it sound like this is really more robust than it truly is. It is seriously the easiest community science program to do. Honestly, you don't need any formal training at all. This is a picture on the left here of my coworker of a red-bellied woodpecker, one of the very few times that a red belly actually is showing any little bit of red on there too. So, all right. So I'm just going to quickly get out of this particular PowerPoint here. All right. And I'm going to share my last screen here about some All righty. Where is my other? Here we go. All right, I'm going to go slideshow here, and I'm going to leave open a little bit time here at the end so you can all ask me questions if you have any questions here, right? So I talked about some. So again, the Great Backyard Bird Count coming up here in the next couple of weeks, super easy to do. I'm also going to talk about, again, some of these birds that you have in your backyards that are either pretty common or are not super common, right? If you want to get ahead of the game and you like observing these birds and want to bring them to you, if you don't have a bird feeder, get a bird feeder. That's one of the best ways to help birds in colder weather come to you. Now, this is key, and I shouldn't be admitting this because I think part of my salary is funded by our birdseed sales, but I'm going to give you a little sort of insider point. Birds do not need our food from our feeders to survive the winter, honestly. But they're there for you to enjoy. It does help them to an extent, but they've shown at most they get maybe 20% of their energy needs from there. The most important thing for these birds that we're rapidly losing in areas we're seeing high development are native plants. And that's why I say they're the best for native plants, because they produce insects and other food types that these birds need year round. There are some birds that eat nothing but insects all winter long, right? So that is really important. I mean, just briefly, and plus, I think a lot of them are very attractive. This is bergamot, or sometimes what's known as bee balm, or what's the other one that's called false bergamot, right? You can make what's called Oswego tea out of it as well. Joe Pye weed, ironweed, right? Our sunflowers. Here's cardinal flower, right? So all of those are important because this time of year, believe it or not, even though you're not seeing a lot of insects, they are in a lot of those plants in our trees where they're not going to be in grass, right? So remember, that is really, truly the key thing. Your feeders, though, what you see here, these are what's called evening grosbeaks that came down in a feeder in 2020. They are an eruptive species. When I first started birding in the 80s, you'd see them every winter in big numbers, and then they disappeared from the late 80s until 2020, right? So it's important for us to understand why they were gone for so long, and they declined pretty substantially, but they seem like they're having a bit of a rebound here, which was great to see. Now, when you feed birds, and this is a common backyard bird, you're going to be feeding some of the predatory species like this accipiter, which is called a Cooper's hawk. Maybe some of you know what that bird is. A lot of people don't like this, but I am working as hard as I can in my job at Audubon to tell you that these birds are just as important as all of the other non-predatory bird species, because they have a very important role in the environment in eating and controlling some of the bird populations. Without predators, populations grow so much that diseases rapidly spread, or other food resources get much more limited. And these are really, really cool birds, very smart, very just able to adapt to a lot of various conditions there. So I know this bugs a lot of people, but you will get these birds at your feeders preying on other ones. Now, remember, though, feeders are great for the great backyard bird count and seeing these other birds that are common in our backyards, but they will sometimes bring in some other species you're going to have to contend with, like these guys. Right? Yes, this is a real photo, not staged. You will get them. Like, we call them affectionately trash pandas, right? But they are related to pandas. But they are hibernating right now. So this time of year, you don't have to worry about it. But yeah, you'll get them, or deer, or squirrels and other things coming to those feeders. So let's just briefly here in the I got about a little less than 20 minutes. Let's just go over some of these common backyard birds that I think a lot of you probably know. We could talk a little bit about some of their ecology and what to expect. And obviously, I think most people would know this is a male northern cardinal. Interestingly enough, this bird was not really found in Western Pennsylvania in any abundance until around, I'd say, beginning around the Civil War, starting to move into the later part of the 19th century. Not really having anything to do with climate or winters, just when we had massive forests, that's not the habitat preferences of cardinals. So they extended their range north as the habitat changed to what they prefer. As we say in the bird world, right, it's the males that are the dulled up ones. They're the pretty ones, right? It's the females that, generally speaking, I still think she's pretty, right? But she's not as flashy. This is the female cardinal, not as flashy as the male is, right? And so we call that sexual dimorphism, which is a big fancy word of saying males and females are different in some way, and it's based on color. Interestingly enough, I'm going to pose a question here for you to all think about for a second. So I'm an ex-college professor, and everybody loves pop quizzes, right? So I'm going to take advantage of my time here to give you a pop quiz. Why do you think you see the male cardinals being bright red in wintertime, especially when we get snow? They hang out together, and our blue jays are certainly just as blue in winter as they are in summer. Same thing with bluebirds. But yet the male American goldfinches, which are perfect Pittsburgh birds, right? They're black and gold. They lose that bright canary yellow in the fall and become much drabber like females. So why do the goldfinches do that, but not the cardinals, the male cardinals, and the blue jays and bluebirds? I want you to think about that for a second. And I'm going to give you a quick hint. It has to do with how birds versus how mammals, but especially humans, perceive color. Okay. Unless you have a superpower, human beings cannot see the ultraviolet spectrum of light, right? So birds perceive colors in a lot of ways on some parts of the spectrum differently than humans do. So that red that you see there on a male cardinal or even female is much more muted when a bird is seeing that, particularly black. Calling it black is not the appropriate way to describe it, but it's not that flashy red that you and I see. That has less importance to do between males and females seeing each other, but more importantly, that Cooper's hawk that I showed you that eats birds, they see those colors much more muted than you and I do, so they blend in easier. Blue, same thing. It appears as a shade of black, for lack of a better term, so they blend in well. But birds, including your Cooper's hawks and other hawks, can see yellow just like you and I can. So that canary yellow of a male goldfinch works in the summertime when you get a lot more green foliage around that kind of hides them, but not in winter, right? So that's selection pressures based on purely on how birds perceive color. I think it's a kind of cool thing to contemplate too there. So cardinals are, again, continuously, they're doing quite well. Very, very common species that you find across pretty much the majority of Eastern North America down into Mexico. Here's our blue jays in the corvid family, closely related to crows and ravens. Males and females are also non-sexually dimorphic, so they look exactly alike. And again, in the Christmas bird count, you do not need to put in male or female. We're just counting the species and how many you saw. So that's only the real important thing. And when you hear blue jays doing their J call, making all those loud sounds, often they are talking, those jays and other various things, and they might even be talking about you. So they have a language, and believe me, I've been really focused on them for the last number of years here. It's pretty amazing some of the stuff that we're seeing with them. So this is just showing the range. We are right smack dab in the middle of their range, right? Crows, right? Obviously, by far, I'd say our most common corvid that we have around here, rebounding quite well from all of the West Nile issues that they had, right? But there is a species that I don't have on here because it is not common down your way, but it may start be pretty soon, and those are ravens. Ravens are about a third larger. They don't group up like crows do. They're also, like crows, very intelligent. In fact, they're even more intelligent than crows, but they're not yet there enough in your area like crows and blue jays are for me to include this. Here's your chickadees. Remember, you're going to put either Carolinas or hybrids. They have a pretty small bird, a very common resident species we have. Even Carolinas and hybrids still have that black cap. They look exactly like black cap chickadees. except they're a little bit smaller, and that white that you see there on their wings is more muted versus a black cap. This is actually what you see here, a black cap, because the white is substantially brighter on that wing, but don't worry about that, right? So this is, again, this, if you ever have any interest, this is the difference between, this is a black capped white nape. You get what we call bold white edges on secondaries. Carolinas don't have that. This is a Carolina, right? Looks almost exactly the same, but the nape's a little bit grayer. Again, gray edge secondaries. I know it's really subtle. If you study it enough, you can see it, but that's why we say, again, I just know geographically, just put Carolinas or Carolina hybrids or black capped. And this is what we see here. The Carolina chickadees and black caps are differentiated by the minimum winter temperatures they can survive. Black caps can survive substantially colder winters than Carolinas. That's why they're larger. Believe it or not, the further north you go, animals start to get larger rather than smaller, because bigger animals hold body heat better than smaller animals do. That's why in the Ice Age we had woolly mammoths and all sorts of mammals that were huge, and that's so they could hold heat in better. Carolinas, they just, the minimum winter temperature, they're not as hardy as black caps, and so as our winters continue to warm substantially, they are just rapidly pushing black caps, which I bet you by the end of this century, black caps will be completely gone from the entire state of Pennsylvania, maybe even before the end of the century. It's happening much faster than we anticipated. And that's why this data in the Great Backyard Bird Count is so important, right? This just shows the hybridization zone. And this is now obsolete. I have to adjust it because it's actually, again, shifted further north quicker than we had thought it would be. So here's some other common ones. This is your tufted titmouse, another really, the only bird with a little tuft that is gray. Very, very common. Males and females look exactly alike. If you're learning bird song, this is where Merlin comes in, because they'll really throw you for a loop. They can do all sorts of various calls. So we have a joke in my master birder class when I'm teaching bird song. I say, if you can't figure it out, I say, when in doubt, it's probably a tufted titmouse, right? If you can't figure out what the bird is, because they do weird sounds. There's another one just sitting there with its little gray crest up, right? Also another bird that really did not start moving into our area until about the late 19th century, early 20th century, but now is here in abundance. Another super common bird, the white-breasted nuthatch. This is a trunk and tree specialist. You often see them creeping down the tree or your side of your house head first, or on limbs. They got that straight, thick beak with a little upturn on the end, so they can take sunflower seeds from your feeders and cache them into holes and bark. I know at our barn at Beechwood Farms one year, I saw a sunflower sprouting out of the side because one of these birds, the white-breasted nuthatch, had put it in there, and it sprouted and found enough, I guess, moisture and dirt that we had a little sunflower growing out of the side of it. So, but very, very common, right? You can see they're, like the name suggests, white breast underneath. They've got that bluish gray back and a black cap, but a very, very common bird. You can see there's one caching some sunflower seeds there, right? Which they love to do. Most of those birds, when they go to your feeder, grabbing those seeds and putting them in caches for a rainy day. And often blue jays will watch silently, watch this guy go and cache them, and then remember and come back at a different time and steal all the seeds. Or a mouse will get in there, or a squirrel, right? So they do multiple different caches. Sometimes they do fake caches, right? So it's cool watching how a lot of these birds do a lot of these different behaviors, right? Another very common one you can see widely distributed. This is by far our most common woodpecker. Probably most of you, if not all of you, have this bird either in your yard or nearby. This is what's known as a downy woodpecker. Pretty small bird, very common. Males have a little red patch behind their head, females do not. For every woodpecker that you see that's smaller, that has that black and white speckling, you're going to get probably 8 downies to 2 hairy woodpeckers, which you're going to see next year. This is a hairy woodpecker. They look a lot like downies, but they're larger. And interestingly enough, they are not closely related either. That we think that pattern evolved on both of them, what's called convergent evolution, because whatever that pattern is, Cooper's hawks and sharp-shinned hawks and other hawks can't see them as well when they're up against a tree trunk here, right? But this bird, the hairy there, has a big, thicker bill, and is about a fourth to a third larger from the downy, right? There's the female, both just like the downy. Red on the back of the head means the male. One without any red on the back of the head means it's a female, right? Widely distributed, but not a ton of them. Here's a great example of a comparison side by side of the two species, right? You would guess, so many people go, oh, that's just the parent and the baby, right? Nope, those are both adults. It's just showing the size difference in the fact, again, that these birds are not closely related on any level than you would think, which I think is pretty remarkable, right? But suet is a great way to get woodpeckers into your yard, like a suet cage. There's some of the markings. You can see downy there. That's a male on the left, a hairy on the right, just showing that that is a male. We've been getting a good number of these birds this winter. This is mostly a bird that we used to only have in the warmer months. This is your northern flicker, yellow shafted. Sometimes you'll just see it, a yellow shafted flicker. Really bizarre markings, but that tells me just by looking at all those dots are basically saying that this is a ground dwelling woodpecker. The reason why they're around this winter, part of it's temperature, but mostly it's because one of their favorite winter foods is poison ivy. They survive and subsist almost exclusively on poison ivy berries, and we had a very abundant crop of them last year, so that's what they're eating now. You can see them on the ground, especially in the summer months, eating ants, right? Look at that look of a yellow shafted flicker flying out there, right? And they hybridize. Out west, the same species, but they're red shafted, right? Last couple here, and I'm going to open it up to questions for you all if you have any here. This is, again, that aptly named before. I said red-bellied woodpecker. This is the male that has the solid red mohawk. You see that red belly on there? Neither do I, right? So it clearly has, you can just sense a little bit of pink, but a lot of those birds do not have any red that is, you can perceive on their bellies. Plus, they're often hard to see their bellies or their chest because their back is up, facing away from the trunk as they're creeping up there. So a lot of novice birders confuse them with the red-headed woodpecker. But red-headed woodpeckers have a solid red head. They don't have that zebra striping. They have a sort of a solid, darker backing, and red-headed woodpeckers are substantially rare. Red bellies are one of our most common woodpeckers that we have, right? You can see the female there on the right and a male there on the left, okay? Here is your woody woodpecker, pileated woodpeckers. Again, when I first started birding 30 years, almost 40 years ago, they were still pretty rare, but now they've become super common. These are your crow-sized woodpeckers, and they can do some serious damage if you have wood siding. And they cause not only damage, but that means you have carpenter ants in your siding because that's what they like. Males have the little red mustache, females do not, but they're crow-sized, right? You can see them flying right there. All right, last couple real quick, and I'll open up the questions. I'm just being mindful of my time, or more importantly, your time here, right? Here is a Carolina wren, our by far most common resident that you're going to get hearing calling right now with all this warm weather. They sound like they're saying tea kettle, or I hear in my mind's eye when I hear them, sounds like they're saying Germany, Germany, Germany. They start breeding here in Western PA in February. So they're already in the early stages of breeding. A bird that started to move in the Western PA in the 30s, the cold winter of 76 wiped out a number of them, but they are now more common than they've ever been, and rapidly them moving up into Canada. You may have thought that robins migrate, and the answer is sort of. Our robins that are here in the summertime, some of them seem to go south, some of them are seeming to stick around. And on top of that, we're getting Canadian robins that are moving into our area and staying over winter. So we're seeing them year round, and every single year they're becoming more and more abundant. So this is one, if you don't already see, that's the first one was a male, this is the female. You will definitely see those birds here in February, right? So it's really confusing. So the last couple here, I'm going to go quickly. This is a male bluebird with the female there. Much more abundant than they were even 20 years ago, pretty common. And then the last couple here, this is a song sparrow. Almost every one of you will have this bird around your house. Song sparrows have the little stick pin there. This is a field sparrow you may have down there, swamp sparrow. This is a goldfinch in its breeding plumage. I just had to show that one off, right? But this is what they look this time of year. Goldfinches are very common backyard bird feeders species. This is the muted version of it as well. And then last, but certainly in my humble opinion, best, right? These are your cedar waxings right there. And they called that because you can kind of see the wax. It looks like their wings were dipped in wax there, right? Mockingbirds you may have. I'm just going to go real quick. Mourning doves. I had more on here than I thought. Sorry, I get so enthusiastic about them. I just don't want to stop telling you
No,
about
it's good. We love it.
Good. Well, good. I'm glad to hear, right? All these birds I'm showing you are very common in your backyards. Even kingfishers, if there's any water around you there, and I know you have some lakes down there. I remember going around there. You will get them. We had more this winter than ever before. A very, very common fish-eating species there. So, all right. With that said, I'm going to stop there. And I know I have a couple more minutes left here. Does anybody have any questions that you would like me to answer about either the great backyard bird count or any of these common backyard birds or anything about birds and nature in general that I can answer for you?
Yeah.
When I go walking in the woods, I use Merlin sound,
Merlin sound.
and I don't see any of these birds. I just hear them. Do they count as the great backyard bird count? If I'm on Merlin, they report it.
The answer is absolutely. Yep. It is. That's why they make it so easy. Yes, that you just turn on Merlin, record them. Don't even have to look at them. Just put them in that way. So if you like using Merlin sound, definitely do it.
You got a question?
Yeah, I saw a heavily streaked, kind of looks like a big sparrow, like a light buff, but really, really dark, heavily streaked. And I looked in a bird book. I thought it was a pine siskin, which I've never seen before, so I'm not really sure what I saw. But I mean, the contrast is really great on this bird.
Well, here is where some challenges in birding come in, and this is what I like about it because it taxes your brain a little bit, right? It's kind of like a whodunit or what was it, right? Is it possible to pine siskin? Yes, but by probability, what you're describing is probably either a song sparrow or another one of the common sparrows. Pine siskins do have streaking, but one of the things that you'll see about them is they are going to be really specific in their food resources. So if that's, and again, if you're not sure, that is totally fine. I tell people this all the time, even in my master bird class. There are times when I'll look at a bird and I don't know what it is, and that's okay, right? So if you can't identify, just say, I'm not going to put it in, and I'm going to think about it a little bit more and tax my brain, and that's how we all learn.
Are they common in our area? Has anybody else seen them?
No, not this year. They're what's known as an eruptive species. When I was talking about eruptive, some years when they erupt, they're one of the most common birds you'll see at your feeders. Then other years, you'll go 4 or 5 years without seeing one of them.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's really hard to say and predict. It's all based on food resources up in Canada and changes year to year.
Thank you.
We had one more here in the room.
I used to get rose-breasted grosbeaks, male and female at my feeder, in the spring and summer, but I didn't have them much.
Was it just last year that you did not have them?
Yes.
Yeah, you are probably, what you were noticing is you were seeing either a migrant, because they are giant cardinals, basically in the same family. When they're coming from South America or Central America, they will stop at feeders and fuel up. And if they're moving on to somewhere north, you're not going to notice them. And those birds don't live super long in the wild. So let's say the one that remembers your feeder and comes back year to year, it didn't survive breeding season. A Cooper's hawk ate it, or down in the middle of Amazon, a giant harpy eagle ate it, right? Or an anaconda, who knows? Then you won't notice it. But they are on, one of the good things is they are on the upswing with their population. So it's just real hit or miss to see them at feeders.
Okay, we have one last question here in our room.
How important, we have feeders in our backyard, how important is it to have a source of water locally?
That is way more important than having food. Honestly, you will get birds at your water sources that you'll never see at a feeder. So why we always say, right, one common denominator life has on planet Earth is we all need water. And you'll get golden crowned kinglets and brown creepers and other birds that won't ever come to a feeder stop at your water. So definitely, it's very important.
Well, thank you so much, Chris. For the people online, I posted the link, and for the people in the room, I printed some and put them on the back table, but it is the common winter birds of Pennsylvania from the Game Commission. So I was like going through and checking. I'm like, yeah, he said that one and that one. He said several that were not on this list, but then I checked their website and I think it hasn't been updated in maybe 12 years.
Yeah.
So maybe you want to reach out to him about that. But it does have pictures, not all of like the variations of male, female for some of the ones Chris was talking about, but that's a good starting place if you're looking for some visual cues too.
Yeah, and thank you very much, because I was going to say you preempted that there are some searchable. There are PA ones that aren't just the Game Commission that are a little bit easier that different bird organizations have. So Google makes everything easier for us today. So you can. I was just going to say just Google it, but yeah, it does. The Game Commission and others is a really good resource for the common ones.
Well, thank you so much for your time tonight, Chris. Thank you for everyone coming to the library and that joined us online.
Thank you very much.
And if you guys are looking for more information, the great backyard bird count, my coworker kept calling it the bird hunt, and we're like, no, stop it. It's not hunt, it's a bird count. There's some in the stuff on the back table as well. And I'll email stuff out to the people at home too. But thank you again so much, Chris. And thanks guys for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.